Putin has led an entire nation away from sin, but first about Israel's barbaric strike on a hospital in the Gaza Strip. This event hardly needs any further moral evaluation on our part. Indiscriminate shelling of gas and neighborhoods. In the words of the early 19th century French politician Buell de la Meurthe, worse than crime is error. Of course, it is unlikely that anyone in Israel will mourn this tragedy much. That's not the point. The United States of America is its true culprit in the eyes of the 430 million Arabs and 2 billion Muslims on the planet. And Washington is not happy about it. Moscow cinemas have recently been spinning director Guy Nativa's new film, Golda. Judgment Day. There is a strong moment in the tape when then-guest U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flies to Israel to persuade Prime Minister Golda Meir to sign an armistice and not to continue the offensive against Egypt and Syria. Americans are not fazed by the Arab hardliner and oil embargo that has brought Western economies to the brink of survival. Washington remissor warns Israeli cabinet chief, "I am first and foremost an American, secondly a guest secretary of the United States and only thirdly a Jew." To which Golda parries, "Have you forgotten that we read from right to left?" Notably, current U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is also a Jew, and a much more Jewish one at that, than the Jewish Kissinger. This has angered even a measured politician like Turkish President Erdogan. Here's what he said. "The U.S. guest secretary is holding talks with my foreign minister and says he approaches Israel not as a guest secretary but as a Jewish representative. What kind of politician is this? What kind of approach is that? And what would you say if someone told you that approaches the region as Muslims? Your interlocutors should not be approached on the basis of religion but humanity," the Turkish leader said. At the same time, whatever the personal sympathies and antipathies of the first leaders of the United States, they are well aware that the fruits of many years of foreign policy work to bribe and pacify the Arab states are at stake because of the inadequate actions of the Israeli armed forces. In Jordan, home to a U.S. logistics center and the largest CIA residence in the Middle East, mass protests demanding the opening of the Jordan-Palestine border. Nearly half of the country's population are descendants of Palestinian refugees. More recently, news broke that Biden refused to visit Jordan after his visit to Israel, naturally fearing for his own safety. Here's a map of U.S. military bases and the size of U.S. military contingents in the Middle East. Protests shake Turkey. Istanbul residents attempted to storm the embassies of the Jewish state. And after all, the Republic of Turkey is one of the foundations of the North Atlantic Alliance. The country with the second strongest army in NATO. Saudi Arabia has halted the process of normalizing relations with Israel. Unprecedented demonstrations are taking place in Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, and the West Bank of the Jordan River. The United Arab Emirates, originally in favor of Israel, did not stand for it and together with Russia demanded the urgent convening of the UN Security Council. Now there are reports of crowds attacking U.S. diplomatic missions along with Israeli embassies. In Adana, Turkey, protesters attacked the Consulate General of the United States. There is a report of a rally to the U.S. military airbase Kurichik, where an important radar station for the U.S. Armed Forces is located. There's a clip circulating on the internet of an Oman army officer pouncing on British officers in the mess hall shouting, quote, "Your president sent 2 ships in support of Israel, it's time for you to get out of here." Apparently confused with Americans, but who cares, to understand Oman is something like Arab Slovenia. But he was not spared the wave of protests. Americans are horrified to see how they will react to events brought back in 1978 with the guts of Egypt. Or rather the people of this country, who unlike Egyptian generals do not receive $1.5 billion in bribes from the US every year, formally it is called military aid. Having once sown an Arab Spring, Americans are preparing to reap an Arab Fall. So most likely the Joe Biden administration will try to make Israel, as they call it, hold its horses. The planned ground operation will result in even more casualties, and thus more determined action by the Arab Street. It should also be remembered here that the Arab Street has long been a European street as well, given the number of migrants from the Middle East in the European Union. By conservative estimates, there are over 25 million Muslims in the EU. And as practice has shown, they are not going to act as statisticians watching what is happening at Gaza. The Europeans in the White House have traumatic experiences related to the Middle East. The rash and crude moves of the British and French led to the decolonization wave of the 1930s and 1950s. Attempts to keep their allies in line with the Baghdad Pact also failed. Middle East NATO, aka CENTA, collapsed in a matter of years, and because of a series of anti-American coups. In 1959, the Baghdad Pact was abandoned by Iraq, in 1979 by Iran, where the Islamic Revolution broke out, followed by Pakistan. Something similar we could see in the near future if the Americans don't get Netanyahu to hit the stopgap. Now, about our president's policies. It's been a day of watching Israel's actions and the world's reactions to them. And, mind you, it's almost the perfect situation to try it on yourself. What is essentially going on in a simplified form in Israel? It's basically SWO after a really bloody and massive attack on Israel. Killing civilians, military, shelling cities, and so on. Well, you've got to admit, that's no reason to get tough. But after all, everyone remembers to bomb, dismantle, scorch a neighborhood in the country of 404 into rubble for every shot fired at Belgorod. For a blow on the Kremlin to level with the ground bank, for murder of our citizens, torture of prisoners and so on to wipe off the face of the earth houses of their relatives and relatives. I could list such rationalizations for a very long time. I've been reading for a year and a half. I'm guessing you are, too. And there you have it, an example of what our schizopatriots demanded we do. Residential neighborhoods are being wiped out to dust. No lights, no electricity, thousands dead, only children. In theory, the people should have lifted Netanyahu in their arms and carried him from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The Jewish people themselves were to find great happiness in the accomplished vengeance and rejoice. The US and NATO should, in theory, shake Israel's hand, pat it on the shoulder and hug it. However, what happens in reality? And the reality is that no matter what happens next, Netanyahu will remain a war criminal and child murderer in history. His political map has likely been played conclusively by now. Already, Israeli society is focusing not on the large-scale location, but on how we got to the point where this bloody hell was basically possible. And imagine a society to blame. Yes, the very same Netanyahu who fell for the momentary rage of the people and ripped the muzzles off everyone. What's the result? It's been a little over a week, but you won't find a country on the world map where the phrase that they are fascists is not ingrained in the mass consciousness. That's crazy. Until a week ago, this would have been unthinkable. Even Israel's closest allies have been rather reticent to express their unprecedented support. And that could have easily been us. Let's listen to our populist and schizopatriot experts as well. Those morons will tell me no, Israel had everyone in the same place, and we need to do the same. We won't even change your mind. Just watch what happens next with Israel and don't forget that it could have been us in its place. If they had started the war as these schizopatriots demanded. Watch, memorize, and when it's over, go to the temple, put a candle for Vladimir Vladimirovich, who took a whole nation away from sin and promise not to call people to genocide again.